What happens when one of television's most fearless hosts decides to confront country music's biggest star about the uncomfortable truths he's been avoiding? It only took 20 seconds for a friendly celebrity interview to explode into one of the most shocking confrontations in daytime television history, leaving the studio audience speechless and one major star walking off the set. Before we break down every explosive moment of this unbelievable showdown, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because we bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations they try to hide, and the moments that celebrities wish never made it to air. Hit that subscribe button right now because what you're about to witness is absolutely wild. Last night's episode of The View was supposed to be a lighthearted appearance. Blake Shelton was there to promote his new album and talk about his life after The Voice. The production team had set everything up perfectly. They had clips ready to roll, questions prepared about his music and his personal life, all designed for an easy, entertaining segment. The studio was packed with fans who had been waiting outside since early morning, hoping to see the country music superstar in person. The energy was high, and everything seemed perfectly set up for an easy, fun conversation. When Blake walked out onto the stage, the audience erupted. People were on their feet, screaming, holding up signs with hearts and song lyrics. Blake walked out to huge applause, his signature charm on full display, that easy smile that had made him a household name. He was wearing his typical casual style, jeans and a button-up shirt, looking every bit the Oklahoma country boy who somehow became one of the biggest stars in entertainment. He hugged all the co-hosts, made a joke about finally getting invited back to The View, and settled into his chair with that easy, relaxed demeanor he's known for. He waved to the audience, pointed at a few signs, and gave everyone that Blake Shelton grin that made millions of viewers tune into The Voice every week. The interview started exactly how you'd expect. Sarah Haynes asked Blake about his new music, and he launched into stories about recording the album, about working with different producers, about getting back to his roots in country music. He talked about spending time in the studio late at night, trying different arrangements, bringing in musicians from Nashville who he'd wanted to work with for years. The audience was loving it, hanging on every word. He was funny, self-deprecating, telling stories about messing up in the studio and having to do 20 takes of one song because he kept laughing at his own mistakes. He did impressions of himself trying to hit high notes, made fun of his own musical limitations, and had the whole studio cracking up. It was classic Blake Shelton, the guy who made America fall in love with him on The Voice, the guy who could laugh at himself while still being incredibly talented. Sonny Hostin brought up his relationship with Gwen Stefani, and Blake's whole face lit up in that genuine way that you can't fake. He talked about how much his life had changed, how happy he was, how they were spending more time in Oklahoma on his ranch, away from the craziness of Los Angeles. He painted this beautiful picture of domestic bliss, of slowing down and enjoying life, of cooking dinner together and taking long walks on the property. He told a funny story about trying to teach Gwen to fish, and her being terrified of the worms. The audience was eating it up. Some people had their hands over their hearts, clearly touched by how genuine he seemed when talking about her. This was the Blake that people loved, the down-to-earth guy who happened to be famous. Alyssa Farah Griffin asked about his decision to leave The Voice after so many years, and Blake gave a thoughtful answer about knowing when it was time to move on, about wanting to focus on his own music again, about not wanting to become stale. He thanked the show for giving him such an incredible platform and talked about how much he'd miss working with the other coaches. Joy Behar jumped in with a joke about whether he'd ever consider running for mayor of his hometown in Oklahoma, and Blake laughed, saying he was way too honest to be a politician. The audience laughed along with him. Everything was going smoothly. The conversation was light, fun, and exactly what a promotional appearance should be. But Whoopi Goldberg had been sitting quietly through all of this, not contributing much, just watching Blake with this expression that was hard to read. Anyone who's watched The View for years knows that look. It's the look Whoopi gets when she's thinking about something, when she's deciding whether to say what's really on her mind. And when there was finally a pause in the conversation, Whoopi leaned forward. "Blake, I want to ask you about something that's been on my mind," Whoopi said, her voice calm but with an edge that made everyone pay attention. "You've had this incredible career. You've been on one of the biggest shows on television. You've got millions of fans, but I've noticed something over the years. You stay really quiet about important issues. Really quiet." The energy in the studio shifted immediately. Blake's smile didn't completely disappear, but it definitely became more careful. "What do you mean by that, Whoopi?" he asked. "I mean that when there are important conversations happening in this country, conversations about civil rights, about equality, about justice, you don't say anything," Whoopi continued. "You're one of the biggest names in country music. You've got a platform that reaches millions of people, but you stay silent. Why is that?" The other co-hosts exchanged quick glances. This wasn't in the planned questions. This was Whoopi going completely off script. "Well, Whoopi, I've always believed that my job is to entertain people," Blake said, and you could hear him trying to keep his tone light. "I make music. I try to bring people together through songs. I don't think people want to hear my political opinions." "This isn't about politics," Whoopi shot back, her voice getting stronger. "This is about basic human rights. This is about standing up for what's right. And I'm not asking you to run for office, Blake. I'm asking why you won't use your voice when it matters." Blake shifted in his seat. "I think everyone has their own way of contributing. I contribute through my music, through entertaining people, through bringing joy to their lives." "That's a nice answer," Whoopi said, and there was definitely an edge in her voice now. "That's a very safe answer. But let me ask you something more specific. Your fan base, a big portion of your fan base, they wave Confederate flags at your concerts. They post things on social media that are racist, that are hateful, and you never say anything about it. You never tell them that's not okay. Why?" The studio got quiet. You could feel the tension building. Blake's expression changed, becoming more guarded. "Whoopi, I can't control what my fans do or what they believe," Blake said, his voice still trying to stay calm, but you could hear the frustration creeping in. "I don't support racism. I don't support hate. But I'm not going to stand on stage and lecture people about politics." "Nobody's asking you to lecture anyone," Whoopi pressed. "But when your name, your brand, your music is being used as a soundtrack for hate, don't you think you have a responsibility to say something? Don't you think you have a responsibility to make it clear that's not what you stand for?" Sarah tried to step in. "Maybe we should," but Whoopi held up her hand. "No, I want to hear Blake's answer to this." Blake took a breath, and you could see him trying to figure out how to respond. "Look, Whoopi, I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma. The people I grew up with, they're good people. They work hard, they take care of their families, they're kind to their neighbors. Are some of them conservative? Yes. Do they have different political views than people in New York or Los Angeles? Yes. But that doesn't make them bad people." "I didn't say they were bad people," Whoopi responded immediately. "But Blake, there's a difference between being conservative and waving a Confederate flag. There's a difference between having different political views and posting racist comments online. And when you stay silent about those things, when you don't draw that line, you're saying those things are okay." "That's not fair," Blake said, and now his voice was getting louder. "You're putting words in my mouth. I never said any of that was okay." "But you've never said it wasn't okay either," Whoopi countered. "That's the problem. Your silence is a choice, Blake, and that choice has consequences." Joy tried to redirect the conversation. "Blake, you've worked with artists from all different backgrounds on The Voice. Surely that experience—" But Whoopi wasn't done. "Let me bring up something specific. A few months ago, there was a controversy at one of your concerts. Someone in the audience was yelling racist slurs, and your security removed them. But you never addressed it. You never mentioned it. You just moved on with the show like nothing happened. Why didn't you say something then?" Blake looked genuinely uncomfortable now. "I didn't know the details of what happened until after the show. And by then it seemed like it was handled." "It seemed like it was handled," Whoopi repeated, shaking her head. "Blake, that was a moment where you could have made a real difference. You could have stopped the show, told your audience that racism has no place at your concerts, that hate has no place in your music, but you didn't. You let the moment pass." "You're making this sound like I support racism," Blake said, his voice rising with frustration. "I don't. I never have. I never would." "Then why won't you say that publicly?" Whoopi asked, leaning forward even more. Why won't you make a statement? Why won't you tell your fan base that if they're racist, if they're hateful, they're not welcome at your shows? What are you afraid of? That question hung in the air like a bomb. Blake stared at Whoopi, his jaw tight. "I'm not afraid of anything," he said, but his voice betrayed him. "I think you are," Whoopi said quietly but firmly. "I think you're afraid of losing fans. I think you're afraid of the backlash you'd get from a certain portion of your audience. I think you're afraid that if you speak up, your album sales might drop. Your concert tickets might not sell as well. And I get it, Blake. I understand the economics of the music industry. But at what cost? At what point do you decide that your integrity is worth more than your bank account?" The studio was dead silent. Every eye was on Blake and Whoopi. The other co-hosts looked like they didn't know whether to intervene or let this play out. "That's a hell of an accusation," Blake said, and his voice was shaking now. Whether with anger or emotion, it was hard to tell. "You're sitting here accusing me of putting money before morality. You don't know me. You don't know what I believe or what I stand for." "Then tell me," Whoopi challenged him. "Tell me what you stand for. Tell me right now on national television that racism is wrong. Tell me that hate has no place in country music. Tell me that you don't want fans who wave Confederate flags and post racist garbage online. It should be easy, Blake. If you really believe it, it should be the easiest thing in the world to say." Blake opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around at the other co-hosts, as if hoping someone would rescue him from this moment. But nobody moved. "It's not that simple," he finally said. "Yes, it is," Whoopi responded immediately. "It really is that simple. Either you stand against racism or you don't. There's no middle ground here." "You're trying to box me in," Blake said, his voice getting defensive. "You're trying to make me say something that you can use against me, or not say something that you can use against me. This is a trap." "This isn't a trap," Whoopi said, her voice rising now too. "This is me asking you to be honest. This is me asking you to take a stand on something that matters. If that feels like a trap to you, that says more about your position than it does about my question." Sonny tried to step in. "I think what Blake is trying to say—" "No," Blake interrupted her, holding up his hand. "No, let me say it myself." He turned back to Whoopi. "You want to know why I don't make political statements? You want to know why I don't get up on stage and lecture my fans? Because I remember what happened to the Dixie Chicks. I remember how they were destroyed for speaking their minds. I remember how they were blacklisted from country radio, how their careers almost ended because they dared to have an opinion. That's what happens in country music when you step out of line." "So you're saying you're too scared to speak up," Whoopi said, and there was disappointment in her voice. "I'm saying I'm smart enough to know how the industry works," Blake shot back. "No, you're saying you value your career more than you value doing what's right," Whoopi corrected him. "And you know what? At least now you're being honest about it." Blake's face flushed red. "That's not fair. You're twisting everything I'm saying." "I'm not twisting anything," Whoopi said firmly. "You just admitted that you won't speak up because you're afraid of what it might cost you professionally. That's the truth, Blake. You can try to dress it up however you want, but that's what it comes down to." The other co-hosts were frozen, clearly not sure how to handle this situation. The audience was equally stunned. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others looked riveted by the confrontation unfolding in front of them. "You know what your problem is, Whoopi," Blake said, and now he was fully engaged in the argument. "Your problem is that you think everyone has to think like you think, believe what you believe, and if they don't, they're automatically wrong. You think there's only one way to see the world, and it's your way. When it comes to racism, yes, there's only one way to see it," Whoopi responded without hesitation. "It's wrong. Period. There's no debate about that. And if you think asking you to condemn racism is asking too much, then we've got a serious problem." "I do condemn racism," Blake said, his voice loud now. "I just told you I do." "You said it to me, in this studio, when I cornered you into saying it," Whoopi countered. "But you've never said it to your fans. You've never made it clear where you stand. And that's the problem, Blake. Your private beliefs don't mean anything if you're not willing to stand by them publicly. Blake stood up from his chair. The action was so sudden that several audience members gasped. His microphone was still on, picking up his heavy breathing. "This is unbelievable," he said, shaking his head. "I came here to talk about my music. I came here to have a friendly conversation. And instead, you ambush me with this." "I didn't ambush you," Whoopi said, standing up as well. "I asked you legitimate questions about your public silence on important issues. If that feels like an ambush, maybe you should think about why these questions make you so uncomfortable." "You want to know why they make me uncomfortable?" Blake said, his voice rising. "Because no matter what I say, you've already decided I'm wrong. No matter how I answer, you're going to twist it into something negative. This whole thing was a setup from the beginning." "It wasn't a setup," Whoopi said firmly. "But I'll tell you what it is. It's accountability. It's asking someone with your platform, with your influence, to think about the responsibility that comes with that. And clearly, you're not ready to have that conversation." "I'm not ready to have this conversation?" Blake repeated, his voice incredulous. "Or maybe you're not ready to accept that people can disagree with your worldview and still be good people. Maybe you're the one who's not ready for that conversation." "We're not talking about worldviews," Whoopi shot back. "We're talking about basic human decency. We're talking about whether you think racism is wrong. And the fact that you're trying to make this about differences of opinion rather than about right and wrong tells me everything I need to know." Blake pulled off his microphone and set it on the table with more force than necessary. "You know what? I'm done. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't come here to be attacked." Whoopi didn't back down. "You weren't attacked. You were asked questions, real questions about real issues, and you couldn't handle it." "Couldn't handle it?" Blake said, his voice sharp. "I've handled plenty in my career, but I'm not going to sit here and let you paint me as some kind of racist sympathizer because I won't perform for you. Because I won't dance to your tune and say exactly what you want me to say in exactly the way you want me to say it. All I wanted you to say was that racism is wrong and that you don't want racists as fans," Whoopi said, her arms crossed. "If that's too much to ask, if that's too hard for you to say without a bunch of qualifications and excuses, then yeah, that's a problem." Blake looked around at the other co-hosts one more time. "Does anyone else think this is okay? Does anyone else think it's okay to invite someone on your show just to attack them?" Sarah looked conflicted. Sunny looked uncomfortable. Joy looked like she was trying to figure out how to defuse the situation. Alyssa was staring at her notes. Nobody jumped to defend either side. "The fact that nobody's defending you should tell you something," Whoopi said. "The fact that nobody's defending me tells me that nobody wants to be the next person you go after," Blake countered. "That's what this is really about, Whoopi. It's about control. It's about making sure everyone knows you're the one in charge, that you're the moral authority, and everyone else better fall in line." "No," Whoopi said, her voice strong and clear. "This is about using your voice for good. This is about recognizing that when you have the kind of platform you have a responsibility to stand for something. And if you're not willing to stand against racism, if you're not willing to make that clear to your audience, then you're part of the problem." Blake picked up his jacket from behind his chair. The audience realized what was happening. He was leaving. He was actually walking off the view in the middle of the show. Phones came out. People started recording. "You can twist this however you want," Blake said, putting on his jacket. "You can make me out to be the villain in your story. But I know who I am. I know what I believe, and I don't need to prove anything to you or anyone else in this room." "You're right. You don't need to prove anything to me," Whoopi said. "But you do need to prove it to the people who look up to you. You need to prove it to the fans who see your silence and interpret it as acceptance. You need to prove it to the kids who love your music and need to know that their heroes stand for something." "My music speaks for itself," Blake said. "Does it?" Whoopi challenged. "Because from where I'm sitting, your music says nothing about any of this. Your music is safe, Blake. It's careful. It's designed not to offend anyone, not to challenge anyone. not to make anyone think too hard. And maybe that's fine for your career, but don't act like it's some kind of noble choice." Blake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You don't know anything about my music or what goes into it." "I know enough," Whoopi said. "I know that you've had every opportunity to use your voice to make a difference, and you've chosen not to. And that's your right, Blake. You can make that choice. But don't come on this show and expect us to just smile and nod and pretend that choice doesn't mean anything." Blake shook his head, a bitter smile on his face. "You know what the sad thing is, Whoopi? I actually used to respect you. I used to think you were fair, that you gave people a chance to explain themselves. But this right here? This is just bullying dressed up as activism." "Asking tough questions is not bullying," Whoopi responded immediately. "Holding people accountable is not bullying. If you can't handle being asked about your silence on racism, maybe you need to think about why that is." "I can handle it just fine," Blake said. "What I can't handle is being in a room where my answer doesn't matter because you've already decided what you think about me. There's no conversation happening here, Whoopi. There's just you on your soapbox, using me as a prop for whatever point you're trying to make." "The point I'm trying to make," Whoopi said, her voice rising to match his, "is that silence in the face of injustice is not neutrality. It's not staying out of politics. It's choosing a side. And the side you're choosing is the side of people who want to keep things exactly the way they are, because they benefit from the way things are." "That's bullshit and you know it," Blake said, and several audience members gasped at the profanity. "Is it?" Whoopi challenged. "Then explain to me why you won't make a simple statement condemning racism. Explain to me why that's so hard for you." "Because it shouldn't have to be said," Blake shouted, his voice echoing through the studio. "Because it should be obvious. Because I shouldn't have to prove to you or anyone else that I'm not a racist." "But you do," Whoopi said quietly, which somehow made it even more powerful. "Because your silence has created ambiguity. Your silence has left room for interpretation. And some people in your audience have interpreted that silence as approval." Blake stared at her for a long moment. The studio was absolutely silent except for the sound of his heavy breathing caught by the overhead microphones. "I'm done here," he finally said. "I'm done with this conversation. I'm done with this show, and I'm done trying to explain myself to someone who's already made up her mind about me." "That's fine," Whoopi said, not backing down even an inch. "You can walk away from this conversation. You can walk off this set. But you can't walk away from the responsibility that comes with being who you are and having the platform you have. That follows you whether you acknowledge it or not." Blake didn't respond. He just turned and started walking toward the exit. No goodbye to the audience, no handshake with the other hosts, just a straight line to the door. "And Blake?" Whoopi called after him. He stopped but didn't turn around. "When you get back to Nashville, when you go back to your comfortable life on your ranch, I hope you think about this conversation. I hope you think about what it means to stay silent. Because the world is changing, whether you're ready for it or not." Blake stood there for just a second longer, his back still to the stage, his hand on the door. Then he pushed through it and was gone. The sound of the door closing echoed through the studio, like the final note of a song that ended too soon. For a moment, nobody moved. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. The other co-hosts looked shell-shocked. Whoopi stood there, her arms still crossed, her expression serious but resolute. Finally, Whoopi turned to the camera. "We're going to take a break," she said, her voice steady despite what had just happened. But as the show cut to commercial, everyone in that studio knew they had just witnessed something unprecedented. This wasn't just another celebrity interview that got a little heated. This was a complete breakdown, a confrontation that exposed uncomfortable truths about fame, responsibility, and the cost of staying silent. Blake Shelton had walked off the set of The View, and Whoopi Goldberg had refused to back down from asking the questions that needed to be asked.